Morning, fellow classmates and Kok Yong. And this morning, I'm going to present to us on credit card fraud detection. Here's my mini project 3. This will be the agenda for this presentation: the business problem, the asset analysis, findings, next steps, and the references. So, credit card is a very ubiquitous item for most people. In Singapore, we have out of 5 million people, we have 5.4 million credit card holders. And the volume of transaction in Singapore is huge. Just in 2018 alone, the total volume of credit card payment is 1.2 million transactions, and it's increasing year by year. And the amount of money that we're talking about with credit card is also huge. Every year is about $17 billion. And out of the $17 billion, the bad debts were written off just in 1 year is about $234 million. So you can see that the credit card market is a big business. So what is the business problem here? Way back in 2020, the MAS has announced that they're going to issue 4 digital bank licenses to enhance competition in the credit card market. And those those applicants were already successfully announced. And the first competitor is coming on board way back already in June this year. So the other 3 are under pressure to quickly roll out their offerings online. As we know that digital bank, all the transactions are done online, and therefore online security is very critical. The pandemic had accelerated digitization. E-commerce has shot up, and so has fraud. In fact, you'll find that almost 68% of all e-commerce transactions happen through and take place through the card. So you can see that credit card fraud detection is a very important and critical aspect of the business. Some statistics, those reported of e-commerce fraud through the credit card, last year, 2019 alone, is about 695 cases, and that come up to about $4 million in terms of losses. Note that this is just a tip of the iceberg because it's based on what people present and report. There are a lot of cases where these are not reported. So how serious is the problem? This is a report commissioned last year to look at the payment fraud in Singapore. For the merchants, 9 out of 10 have reported lost revenue due to payment fraud. And the amount of fraud has impacted their revenue, 6% or more of their revenue caused by that. Now, what are the consequences of fraud? It's not just about money. It's about customer churn. 58% say that the fraud had impacted the customer churn. It has also contributed to damage to their reputation and productivity because you have to spend time investigating those fraud. So the merchants are rebuilding smarter in 2021, and therefore even for this new kid on the block, the digital bank ABC here we call them, they are also needed to do even better to combat fraud. So the company has outsourced this business challenge to a contractor, and the purpose of this business challenge is to help them identify what is the machine model that is best be able to use to detect fraud, and also how big should the data set be. Like I mentioned earlier on, every year we have almost 1.25 to 2 million transactions. It's a huge amount of data set. How big and how suitable is the size of data set to use for this learning? That's a question that they would like to ask. Now, in doing this machine learning model, they are hampered by several considerations. Number one is lack of actual customer data, because the digital bank ABC has not even rolled out their offering yet. So they do not have actual customer data. And also, even if they have, there's a concern about customer privacy, and that is protected under the PDPC Act in Singapore. So as a result, the only option for this proof of concept is to use publicly available data set. The stakeholders is big. We talk about the amount of money that's being lost to fraud and the bad debt, especially. The stakeholders are the bank themselves, not just the bank, but also the regulators, the merchants, and then of course the consumers. For purpose of this study, ABC Bank has mandated this metric that it must be at least 90% F1 score. Both recall and precision are very critical, and also to give recommendations for what needs to be done in future when they have the actual customer data. So this is the data science question, build a clustering model to identify fraudulent credit card transactions. The public data set that we obtained come from European customers. There was made by credit cards over 2 days in September 2013. There are about 284,000 transactions, out of which 492 are fraud. So you can see that it's highly imbalanced. Because of confidentiality reasons, the features are all critical components obtained with PCA. So there's not much you can do in terms of feature, in terms of EDA. The only features that are not be transformed are time and amount. Time refers to the time that's been elapsed between each transaction and the first transaction in the data set. And the amount refers to the transaction amount for each credit card transaction. Class is the response variable. It's 1 for fraud and 0 otherwise. For this proof of concept, we have selected 100,000 transactions for a start. The fraud accuracy about 0.2%, similar to the entire data set, just as for us to study further. So this is what we find from the limited information from the data set. Firstly, it's highly unbalanced. 99.8% is without fraud, and only 0.2% is with fraud. We saw that earlier on. And so we'll have to balance it later on when we do the actual training. Secondly, the amount of transaction is in this 100,000 is about $5.7 million total, which only about 0.3%, which is fraud. It may be small, but it's significant. Like I said earlier on, just having a fraud can lead to a massive amount of bad debts. In terms of time of day, we discovered that from the time elapsed, there seems to be a higher incidence of fraud during the wee hours of the morning. This can be investigated further because it's in the actual data set something to look out for, because that may be heuristically answerable, because people in the wee hours of the morning, people's guard are down, and therefore the bad guys can come in. So we did a few analysis, and so first of all, we started with logistic regression to find a simple model, and we tried that and find that the results are not good enough, and therefore we move on to do higher and more complex modeling using ensemble models. We use RandomForest, AdaBoost, XGBoost, and stacking. And this, based on the 100,000 rows, this is the result that we have obtained. Bearing in mind the metrics that the precision must be more than 0.9 and the recall must be more than 0.9. So we can see that RandomForest is close enough, but not exactly meet the requirement. XGBoost is very close, 0.89, 0.89. And then the stacking also very close at 0.89 and 0.89. So we will do one step further. Now we have 100,000 records. Maybe if we can find out a more sweet spot for the training records, perhaps we could get a better score. And so we plot out the learning curve, and in the learning curve we find that the optimal training set that we can use is probably between 50,000 to about 70,000. inside this there could be a sweet spot where the difference between the training and the test set is at its lowest. And so with that in mind, we tried using 60,000. And with 60,000, we see that, yeah, we do see an improvement in the precision as well as the recall. They have increased marginally, and for XGBoost and stacking stack, they have crossed the requirement of 0.9 for both precision and recall. So this is a summary of the different results of the different ensemble methods that we use. We recommend that in terms of ranking, XGBoost and stacking seem to perform better, and then followed by RandomForest. What are the findings from this exercise? Firstly, we have a highly imbalanced data set, and therefore we need to do a proper balancing. Secondly, they are based on the limited info we have in the data set. We do see some trend, especially in the increase in fraud at a certain period of time. So it's something that once we have access to the data set details, we could investigate further. The optimal data set that we use, at least initially, is we don't have to take 1.8 million. This is a lot. We just have to look at about 50 to 70,000 rows for a start, just to understand how the model performs. And the suitable models that we can use, we have a few to consider: XGBoost, stacking, and RandomForest. Next steps. So once the digital bank ABC goes live and we have actual data set, then it's a continuous effort to validate the model on all those actual data sets, starting off with about 50 to 70,000, and then we can progressively see how we fare from there. And secondly, once we have the putting aside the issue of confidentiality, if a special arrangement can be made for us to deep dive into the EDA, so that we can have better understanding of the fraud characteristics, and perhaps from then on to revise and refine our model further. The stretch goal for this proof of concept was about 90%, at least 90% for precision recall. We can consider to stretch it further because we are dealing with money, and therefore we want as high precision and as high recall as possible. We know that with proper tuning, we can do 92%. More data set, with better understanding of data set, perhaps you can go even higher to maybe as a stretch goal, more than 95%. So this is the end of the presentation, and the rest are the references for this exercise. Next, I'll move on to the notebook. This is an introduction of the project, and then we have selected 100,000 rows. As I mentioned, because this is based on PCA, so there's really not much we can do in terms of EDA, except for the part on features and amount. It's quite clean. There's no null, and the percentage of fraud is 0.2% compared to the 99+%. There's no fraud. And we plot the amount using the graph. The amount is also relatively low in comparison. We look at the time of day to understand where fraud happens. Of course, it happens throughout the whole day, but it seems to happen more relatively in proportion during certain wee hours of the day. And then we have a correlation. Again, that it's not so meaningful because these are PCAs. We create the model, we do the split, and then we handle the imbalanced data, training data, sampling, oversampling. We have increased the number of rows. Just now, initially 100,000, now it's for training set with 150,000 thereabout. And we see that with mode, we can balance the Y train is now balanced, but of course the test data remains unbalanced, this is what we use to test the models. We started off with logistic regression, just to understand how it play out, whether this would be good enough. And we see that the recall and the precision is just not good enough. Recall may be better, precision is no good, F1 scores is no good. So we do some tuning, doing a grid search, and we find that even with that, it also does not produce us very good results. And 0.35 just marginally improve the precision and the F1 score. The recall seems to be not bad at 0.91. And so we look at using more complex models like ensemble methods. So we started off with RandomForest, and then we try out. You can see that it shoot up, precision and recall does shoot up quite high, but it's not good enough because our threshold is 0.9. And so we do a grid search on RandomForest, and we find that it also does not give us better improvement compared to what we have before. And we do the same for AdaBoost. Again, has a good balance between recall and precision, but is fall short of our requirement. And then we also do XGBoost, the similar pattern enough. And so we try stacking, and with stacking, we come out with the better results based on 100,000. So it's quite close to the 0.9 for precision and recall. And we next look at the learning curve to see that actually with a smaller sample training set, we can actually perform better. So this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay.